the mid-1970s, across 6 U.S. states, dozens of young women vanished without warning. He wore the face of a volunteer, a boyfriend, a friendly stranger. He was handsome, intelligent, charismatic, the kind of man everyone trusted, until it was too late. Behind the smile was something unspeakable. This is the story of America's charming serial killer, Ted Bundy. Seattle, 1974. A city wrapped in the calm illusion of peace, where college campuses hum with laughter and trust walks freely down quiet streets. But beneath that calm, a shadow was moving. He wore a smile that could disarm fear itself. His voice, gentle, educated, almost comforting, became a weapon. His name was Theodore Robert Bundy. Ted Bundy wasn't the monster you expect. He was handsome, charismatic, and intelligent. A law student, a volunteer for political campaigns, a boyfriend who brought flowers and spoke about dreams of a brighter future. But while the city slept, he was hunting. The same hands that held campaign pamphlets would soon drag young women into the dark woods of Washington state. The first disappearance barely made headlines. Then another, and another. Women vanished from parking lots, libraries, and dormitories. Each one young, each one trusting. The pattern was so ordinary it was terrifying. Brown hair, middle part, college age. They called him Ted. Sometimes Officer Ted. He pretended to have a broken arm or crutches, asking for help loading a boat onto his car. They always helped. They never came back. Detectives in the Pacific Northwest began to see a pattern they didn't want to believe. The description was too normal. A young man, tidy, kind, even cute. The idea of a serial killer who looked like their neighbor was impossible to grasp. Evil had always been painted as monstrous. But Bundy was the monster next door. Every woman he met saw something different. A gentleman, a friend, a protector. They didn't know that behind those calm eyes was a man studying their movements, their smiles, their trust. He memorized the details that made them feel safe, then used them to destroy them. In the span of months, the number of missing women rose to double digits. Communities locked their doors for the first time, posters covered campus walls, faces smiling, dates of disappearance written in red ink. The police had witness descriptions. They had a name, Ted. But they had no idea that Ted was already among them, attending their fundraisers, smiling in their malls, helping search for his own victims. He was everywhere, and nowhere. The boy your parents hoped you'd bring home, the stranger you should have feared. By the time the public knew his name, dozens of lives were already gone. The devil doesn't always arrive with horns and fire. Sometimes he comes dressed in a smile. And for America in 1974, that smile belonged to Ted Bundy.
I'm not different from other people. We're all capable of doing anything.
By the mid-1970s, Ted Bundy wasn't just blending in. He was thriving in plain sight. He was the man you invited to your study group, the volunteer who shook hands with politicians, the friend who drove you home when it was dark. In a nation that judged character by a smile and a college degree, Ted Bundy was the American dream made flesh. He worked for the Republican Party in Washington state, attended law school, and volunteered for a crisis hotline, saving lives by day while ending them at night. Co-workers called him charming, helpful, polite. They couldn't see the fracture that was growing inside him, a dark obsession that fed on control and possession. Bundy didn't see himself as a killer. He saw himself as a collector. Each victim was a project, a challenge to his ego, a puzzle to solve. And every success, every life taken, fed his illusion that he was smarter than the system itself. Detectives were overwhelmed. The disappearances crossed state lines. Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado. No forensic technology. No DNA analysis. Just eyewitnesses, most of them recalling a smiling man named Ted with a Volkswagen Beetle. But how do you hunt a man who looks exactly like everyone else?
I did things that were beyond my own understanding.
Bundy understood people, their manners, their trust, their insecurities. He mimicked human emotion like a language he'd perfected. Friends described him as one of us. But Ted Bundy was never one of us. He was a perfect reflection of what we wanted to see.
He was so normal. You'd never suspect him.
That was his greatest weapon, the illusion of normalcy. He didn't break into homes or stalk alleys at night. He approached you in broad daylight, under the sun, with a smile. The evil was in his ordinary nature. That's what made him invincible. The police had hundreds of witness statements, but no suspect photo, no digital database, no link between states. Each department worked in isolation, and Bundy knew it. He played with jurisdictions like a chessboard, always 3 moves ahead. While one department looked for a Ted in Seattle, another was searching for a student abductor in Salt Lake City. They were looking for different men, but they were the same person. Every killer leaves a signature. Bundy's was his ability to erase it. And while the nation was still debating if a serial killer could exist, he was already becoming America's first. By the time the authorities realized what they were up against, Ted Bundy had become a ghost of his own creation, a face in a crowd, a shadow behind a smile. And as his killings spread across state borders, the nation was about to learn that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it wears a suit and tie. It started with whispers, then became headlines. One by one, young women began to vanish across the Pacific Northwest. College students, librarians, waitresses. They disappeared in daylight, from crowded parking lots, libraries, and campuses. The only trace left behind was a name. Ted. In 1974, fear began to settle over Seattle like a fog. 2 women disappeared on the same day. Broad daylight, a crowded park, hundreds of witnesses. They saw a man with a sling on his arm, polite, well-dressed. He said his name was Ted. He needed help loading a sailboat onto his car, a tan Volkswagen Beetle. He didn't use violence to lure them. He used kindness. He weaponized empathy, the most human of traits. His victims didn't scream. They didn't run. They trusted him. That's what made it so horrifying. Detectives began connecting the dots. Missing women from Washington, Oregon, and Utah, all with the same profile. Young, educated, brown hair parted in the middle. The cases crossed state lines, but the police departments didn't. There was no central database, no shared records, and Ted Bundy knew it.
I don't remember ever feeling bad about it.
He studied his victims like prey. He followed them, learned their routines, practiced his approach. Every abduction was a performance, rehearsed, refined, perfected. He was methodical. He was patient. He was evolving. By the time the FBI began to notice a pattern, Ted was already 3 states ahead. Utah, Colorado, Idaho. Each crime was executed with chilling precision. The same charm, the same broken arm story, the same car. But the bodies were never found in time. In the woods outside Olympia, search teams uncovered a graveyard hidden in plain sight. Bones, scattered clothing, fragments of teeth, all belonging to women whose only mistake was saying yes to a stranger who smiled too kindly.
He was just so normal.
That word, normal, became a haunting echo in every report, every interview, every courtroom, because no one could believe that normal could be evil. But Bundy was teaching America that monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes, they blend into the light. Police had their first suspect, a name, a car, a face. But Ted was charming, confident, articulate. He denied everything, smiled at reporters, and volunteered to help with the search for missing women. The irony was chilling. the killer helping to find his own victims. By 1975, more than 30 women had vanished. The press called it a pattern. The police called it coincidence. And Ted Bundy called it routine. Every abduction brought him closer to exposure, and every smile closer to capture. But before the mask would slip, Ted Bundy would prove one thing: that true evil can hide behind perfect manners. It took years for the cracks to show, for the world to finally see what lay beneath Ted Bundy's perfect smile. For a long time, he had been invisible, not because he hid, but because he didn't have to. He looked like everyone else, and that was his camouflage. By 1975, Ted was living two lives. By day, a promising law student, a political volunteer, a man admired for his intelligence. By night, a predator, watching, waiting, rehearsing his next move. But like every mask, his was beginning to crack. His beloved tan Volkswagen Beetle, the same car witnesses described, became his undoing. When Utah police stopped him for a routine traffic violation, they found something unexpected inside. A ski mask, handcuffs, rope, an ice pick. Everyday items, until you realize what they were used for. It was the first time Ted's two worlds collided, the respectable man and the monster beneath. Detectives began to suspect he wasn't just a name on a witness report. He was the name, the man who haunted their missing persons files for years. Ted Bundy was arrested, but he wasn't panicking. He smiled for his mugshot, confident, calm, almost amused. He knew charm had saved him before, and it would again.
I'm innocent of these charges.
In interviews, Bundy's composure was unnerving. He spoke clearly, even eloquently, denying every accusation. The detectives could feel something off, the arrogance, the lack of fear. But there was no solid evidence yet. Bundy was playing chess while the world was still learning checkers. He was released for lack of proof, and as soon as he was free, he vanished. But Ted wasn't running to escape justice. He was running to feed his compulsion again. His crimes followed him like a shadow, from Utah to Colorado, from Colorado to Florida. Each new location was a reset button. Each new victim, another piece of his hidden empire of terror. He studied investigation techniques. He knew how police worked. He'd even volunteered at a law office specializing in rape cases. He used that knowledge, not to help victims, but to perfect his methods. The mask could only hold so long. Behind the calm voice and polite smile, Ted Bundy was unraveling. His killings were becoming more violent, more desperate. The charm was still there, but now, it came with cracks. Subtle moments where the real Bundy slipped through. Moments where his eyes went cold, and the performance faltered.
Sometimes I feel like there's a force at work that I can't control.
That force, his obsession, was consuming him. Ted Bundy's confidence would become his curse. Because the more he believed he couldn't be caught, the closer he came to being caught. The mask was slipping. The evidence was growing. And the charming young man America once admired was about to become its greatest nightmare. By 1976, the name Ted Bundy was no longer just a whisper. It was a headline. It was a face on every news channel, a presence that hovered between charm and chaos. The law had finally caught up with him. But Bundy wasn't going down quietly. He was going to make the courtroom his stage. Overlay of news anchors reading headlines.
Law student charged with kidnapping. Ted Bundy represents himself in court. The smiling killer.
When Ted Bundy was arrested for the kidnapping of Carol DeRonch in Utah, prosecutors believed it was just one case. One man, one crime. But what they didn't know was that Ted Bundy wasn't just fighting for freedom. He was performing for control, and the courtroom was his new hunting ground.
I have a right to represent myself, Your Honor.
Bundy refused legal counsel. He was a law student after all. He thought he could outsmart the system, and for a while he almost did. His intelligence, his confidence, his smile, they all worked like they always had. Even the reporters couldn't look away. He was magnetic, articulate, and terrifyingly composed. But behind that charisma, Bundy was unraveling. Evidence was stacking up. Witnesses identified him. His Volkswagen was tied to multiple missing women. The facade was crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of his own arrogance. After his first conviction, Bundy was sent to jail. But Ted Bundy wasn't the kind of man who accepted confinement. In 1977, during a court hearing in Colorado, he asked to use the law library to prepare his case. Left unshackled and alone, he jumped from the second-story window and disappeared into the mountains. For 6 days, he evaded capture, surviving in the wilderness, stealing food, sleeping in cabins. When police found him again, exhausted and starving, he smiled, as if it was just a game. But it wasn't over. 6 months later, he escaped again. Bundy sawed a hole in the ceiling of his cell, crawled through, and walked right out of the Garfield County Jail. No one noticed for nearly 15 hours. By the time they did, Ted Bundy was already 1,000 miles away, heading south to Florida.
Florida police are searching for an escaped inmate believed to be extremely dangerous.
What no one knew then was that Ted Bundy's final, most brutal chapter was about to begin. In January 1978, he entered a sorority house at Florida State University. What happened inside would shock the nation. 4 women attacked, 2 dead. The Chi Omega murders became the turning point, the moment the mask shattered completely. When Bundy was arrested again a week later, he was found driving a stolen car filled with IDs, stolen items, and a weapon. Yet even in handcuffs, he smiled for the cameras. Clean-cut, confident, unbothered. He wasn't just a killer anymore. He was a spectacle.
I'm not guilty of murder. I'm not guilty of any crime.
The trial that followed became a national obsession, the first to ever be televised live across America. Millions watched, not to see justice served, but to witness evil disguised as intellect. Bundy cross-examined witnesses, argued with judges, smiled at jurors. He wasn't defending himself. He was seducing the spotlight. In that courtroom, Ted Bundy's mask finally cracked. Beneath the words, the smiles, the logic, was chaos. And though the verdict was inevitable, Bundy never stopped performing. He was found guilty, sentenced to death. But Ted Bundy wasn't finished, not yet. By the late 1980s, Ted Bundy was no longer a law student, no longer a charmer, no longer a free man. He was inmate number 30,67 at Florida State Prison. The man who once manipulated crowds and cameras was now trapped inside a 6-by-9-foot cell, left alone with his mind, his memories, and his crimes. Bundy's execution had been delayed multiple times. Lawyers, appeals, new evidence, but time was running out. And as it did, Ted Bundy began to talk. Not to confess, but to perform one last time.
I'm not a normal person. I've known that for a long time.
He began granting interviews. Reporters, psychologists, and FBI profilers came to hear the killer speak. But Bundy never gave straight answers. He talked in riddles, in hypotheticals. Every confession was wrapped in distance. You see, he would say, what a person like that might do. As if the monster he described wasn't him, but a reflection in the glass.
A person like that can appear normal, charming, even trustworthy.
He studied his own darkness as though it were a science. When FBI agent Bill Hagmaier began interviewing him, Bundy opened up, slowly, strategically. He wanted to be understood, not condemned. He spoke of an entity inside him, a compulsion that grew stronger with every act of violence. But even in those final days, he refused to say the words, "I killed them." He always spoke as if it were someone else. The tapes that survive today are chilling not for what Bundy admits, but for how calmly he describes the indescribable. There is no remorse, no shame, only curiosity, the way a scientist dissects a specimen.
Murder is not about lust or violence. It's about possession. When you feel their last breath, you own them forever.
For Bundy, death wasn't the end of control. It was the ultimate form of it. But time, at last, was stronger than Ted Bundy. The appeals ended. The cameras returned. And on January 24th, 1989, the man who once eluded capture, who once escaped twice, now sat strapped to Florida's electric chair. He looked out at the witnesses, reporters, guards, victims' families, and smiled one last time. His final words were simple. Give my love to my family and friends. No apologies, no confessions, just a final act of composure from a man who believed he could charm death itself. When the current stopped, America cheered. Crowds outside the prison erupted in celebration, waving signs, chanting, burning Bundy's name into the air. It was as if the devil himself had been cast out. But inside those walls, something far darker lingered, the echo of a man who turned empathy into a weapon.
We serial killers are your sons, your husbands. We are everywhere.
That was Ted Bundy's final message to the world, that monsters don't come from hell. They come from home. The body of Theodore Robert Bundy was cremated. His ashes were scattered over the Cascade Mountains, where many of his victims were found. Some say the human mind can't comprehend true evil. Others say it can't look away. I'm not sure which is worse. In the end, Ted Bundy smiled, even as the lights dimmed for the last time. He left behind questions that will never be answered. How can evil hide behind such charm? This was America's charming serial killer, Ted Bundy. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Shadow Tales, where every story hides a darker truth. Until then, look into the eyes next to you, because the face of evil might just smile back.